This is the Pro Wrestling Illustrated podcast. I'm your host, PWI senior writer Al Castle, joined as always by my co-host, Brian Solomon. What's up, Brian?
Nothing much. Happy to be here as always, Al.
Happy summer. We're now in the summer, and joining us for the first time in a long time, our old pal, PWI contributing writer, Mike Bessler. What's up, Mike?
It's good to be back. It has been a while.
Yeah, Mike goes way back as far as, who got there first, you or me at PWI? When did
I
you
think
start?
you were there first. I want to say I came kind of into the PWI orbit around 2009.
Okay, yeah. So I started in 2007, but yeah, you're one of the people I remember from way back, including, did you ever do one of the 500 meetings in person?
I did.
Yeah,
I did.
So
that was an interesting time.
those were fun. Yeah. I don't think Mike minds me saying Mike's had some health issues as of late, is working his way through it. Glad to see you on the Men Buddy. We've all been pulling for you, and it's one of the reasons I want to have you back on here.
I'm glad to be back, and everybody at PWI was very supportive. In fact, I took some time off. It was the first issue I had missed in like 10 years. I was just
Wow.
It just killed me to be away, but it was much needed, and I appreciate that.
You know what? While you mentioned, why don't you mention some of the things that you do for the magazine? I mean, you've got plenty of lifting that you do for every issue.
Yeah, I write Before the Bell, which is the first. I always tell people the first 4 pages after the editor's lead in. So typically some media reviews. We've expanded that. It used to be just 1 page. Now we try to get 2-3 items in there every issue. Some humor pieces like Talking Trash. We heard that. One to watch usually, and then we had some random things in. If you ever check that out and look at it pretty closely, you can tell that I grew up reading like Cracked magazine and publications, fine publications like that. So that's where I get draw upon for some of the humor pieces. It's a really good time. I'm happy to do it. Do a feature piece every once in a while. I used to write the Indie Roundup. Wanted to give that to one of the younger people, so to speak.
Yeah, pass the torch.
So yeah, that's really been my thing for a very long time now. Before the Bell.
What have you wrestling related for Before the Bell? What have you read or watched lately? No spoilers, I guess, of your next review, but anything fun?
Yeah, I've been getting caught up on AEW and TNA. I spend a ridiculous amount of time watching very old wrestling. So anybody who knows me in any time situation like this, I always bring up my affection for Pafo's ICW and early Memphis stuff from the 1980s, particularly Memphis 1982. And I mean, there's no sense in trying to deny it. I mean, that's what I watch most of the time. I literally watch episodes that I saw when I was like maybe 8 or 9 years old.
Yeah.
YouTube has changed everything. I can pull those up whenever I want, and it just pulls all the levers in my brain and reminds me of that. That's still entertainment to me.
Mike, have you heard that WWE? There was a story that WWE may have acquired the ICW library, I guess, from Lanny Poffo, or before he passed, or that it may go up on Peacock. I mean, I don't know if there's any truth to it, but it's pretty cool if that happens.
It would be. I'm really curious about that because I think it's always been kind of it almost feels like kind of a private thing to me. I don't know about you guys, but I grew up at a time where a lot of people were getting out of wrestling, but kayfabe was still very much alive where I lived. I lived in the Memphis territory. So it always felt like, this really was something I was really, really into, and a lot of my peers were not. And when I go back and watch some of the ICW stuff now, it still does it for me. I'm not sure if it's going to do it for other people who've grown up in different eras, but the history there, as far as the people who came out of ICW and Memphis, who were kind of sparring a lot of times, the history there and just seeing some of those guys right as they were starting out is tremendous. So I hope that it happens, and I hope people appreciate it, because I'm still working off of old grainy VHS tapes and a little bit that I can find on YouTube.
That's the challenge of now Peacock, what was the WWE Network, is that all this archival content that means everything for some people, right? Each of those audiences are relatively small, right? So you know, I grew up in New York in the 80s. I love that 80s, early 90s era of WWF. Means nothing for people who are 10, 15 years younger than me, grew up on the Attitude Era. The older stuff, the San Martino era, the WWF era, means nothing. Not that that doesn't mean anything to me, but I don't have that connection to it, right? Because I didn't live through it. So, you know, I think like the fans who get very nostalgic always get frustrated when so much of again what was the WWE network focuses on this new content, and WWE has always sort of seemed sort of slow to really embrace the old stuff. But the reality is, you know, something like an ICW, again, for people like you who grew up on it, how great! Imagine that in like, you know, great quality uploaded on WWE Network. Realistically, how many people, you know, are going to get that excited about it? It's going to be like a tiny audience.
Boy, way to rain on his parade, Al. Holy cow.
I'm surrounded by like two like kings of old school here. I'm like the young buck here.
But you're right. They do need to, from a business standpoint, they need to focus on the new current stuff. And I know people who are on the inside there and people who have worked on the digitizing and everything. And I mean, the fact is that what you're saying is true, that the interest is very small compared to the other stuff that's on there. But, you know, I think the way they look at it is it just adds more potential clicks, potential views. It's always good to have. It's not a huge priority, but it does. And also, I think it is nostalgic for people that grew up with it, and I think that's a big part of it. But what I also think is cool, and it does happen, I've talked to people where you do get people who maybe didn't get exposed to it, maybe because they were in a different area or maybe because they're too young, and they actually will occasionally get turned on to something, you know, that they didn't know about. Like I didn't grow up in like Arkansas, but I'm obsessed with watching Mid-South wrestling episodes on Peacock because it's something so different and not what I was used to growing up and everything. So there are people that love that, and the quality. You can't. I mean, we all got so used to just the like fourth generation VHS dubs and like looking through the static to see, you know, and now it's like an embarrassment of riches to the point where I'm so spoiled. The other day I went on YouTube because WWE doesn't do much with their Florida footage. And after the Graham family episode of Dark Side of the Ring, I was like, I want to see some Florida stuff. And I went on YouTube, and it's phenomenal. I mean, the episodes, the matches, the storylines, it's great television. But a lot of it looks very bad, like quality-wise, compared to what you can find on Peacock with the old stuff. And so I sort of get spoiled, like, oh, I wish this looked better, where I wouldn't have even thought about that, 10 years ago.
So, some degradation in quality for these videos, though, I think even adds a charm to it, because that's how you would have watched it at the time with your rabbit ears. So there are some very like prolific YouTube uploaders who have stuff up there clearly off of a VHS, good enough quality, commercials in it. I mean, that's like
sometimes they're better. Sometimes the commercials are the best.
Part. Yeah, that's the funny thing. You think about how much effort growing up we put into like taking the commercials out of those recordings. And now when I pop in one of my own VHS tapes that I recorded that has the commercials in it, it's so great. Right?
You're right. I used to cut out all the commercials, and now sometimes when I watch those old tapes, I'm like, I wish I had not done that, because I would love to have gotten a chance to see those commercials again.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's where the nostalgia happens.
I wanted to say I just recently reviewed Wrestling from the Heartland Volume 3 for I think the issue that's out now. And that is basically, I think it's got to be over 4 hours of footage, I think from around the 90s. It includes some guys who are big stars now and some guys that were, mostly mid-carders in their career. And a lot of it was just kind of fixed camera, one angle, not great audio, but it was terrific for me. I like going down those rabbit holes. Reviewed some documentary about a promotion in the Pacific Northwest last year, and just kind of fell in love with this promotion. I didn't even know much about it or the people from it. Chris Jericho had wrestled one time in it, which was the claim to fame for the promotion. But I ended up going back through and looking for as many matches from this promotion as I could on YouTube, and it's fun to discover stuff like that. So I hope people find that in this stuff that's still being added. And the mission of WWE has always been to be bigger. It's like the Galactus of the wrestling universe. So someday it's going to consume us all, I would imagine.
Yeah. And that's one of the fun parts of this job is discovering and exploring new stuff. And we're about to get into that in a real big way with the PWI 500. I think we're coming up on our first meetings next week, maybe. So it's that time of year again. Before then, we got a couple more issues. I think this is we got a new issue. This is the latest I have, but I think the newest one at least is up digitally now, the July issue of PWI. And I just pulled it up, and it's got Seth on the cover talking about the new World Heavyweight Championship. It's got Trinity on the cover, who I interviewed for the hot seat feature. And who was the third person? I forget. But anyway, another great issue. You don't want to miss it. PWI-online.com. Your one-stop shop for all things pro wrestling illustrated. We used to talk a lot about, get the print subscription if you like having the magazine in your hand, or get the digital subscription if you want it faster, more convenient. Now we have a bundle package. You can get both. So best of both worlds. Why settle for, what does it say? As little as $45 a year. You can get every issue of PWI, both digitally and the print. Head on over to PWI-online.com. To do that, we again, I mean, not that it's ever not a busy season, but Kristen and I have started working on the PWI poll, which is a pretty heavy lift every year. Then we get into the 500. Then we get into the women's 150. I think it's 150 this year. The tag team list. So really getting into kind of the meat of the year, the tentpole issues. You don't want to miss any of it. Head on over to PWI-online.com. You can also pick up PWI merch. You can subscribe to the weekly newsletter, which is completely free, and so much more. So please support what we're doing. How many years going on strong are we now?
44
years. Wow. So yes, and still really enjoying it. And please give us a look. Lots to talk about, guys. So let's jump into it. Don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but because Mike is my old school TNA buddy, and these old PWI 500 meetings, Mike would be the one pushing for like some obscure TNA wrestler to be number one or in the top 10. I don't know how closely you're watching these days, but some news with Alex Shelley winning the world title. I think that caught a lot of people by surprise. They just put the thing on Steve Macklin, and it felt like, they were getting Macklin up and running to be the new big star. And this doesn't necessarily mean that they're stepping away from that. But I don't know if it signifies what it signifies. Did they had second thoughts, buyer's remorse on Macklin? Did they see something or not see something? And Alex Shelley, kind of an unusual choice, because on one hand, he very much is TNA and sort of the best of TNA, right? I mean, like he was... him and Saban were one of the bright spots during some of the worst years of TNA. He's got 20 years in the company, never won the big one. The flip, and a fantastic wrestler. He talked in that promo last week about all the guys he had a hand in training, and they really are a who's who of top stars, including Okada, I think he talked about. The flip side of that is, he's one half of a tag team wrestler. I don't know. Of the two, Saban's been the one that's had more of a singles career, had a brief run with the world title and Impact. So it just kind of caught me out of the blue. If they're serious about going all in and giving a big push, he's a fantastic wrestler, getting up there. I don't know. I've got mixed feelings about how this reflects on Impact. What do you think, Mike?
I'm not sure. On the one hand, I really enjoyed seeing that. It was entertaining. I could tell that there was a lot of emotion behind it. If I'm being 100% honest here, I have strayed from TNA the past couple of years. AEW has taken a lot of my attention, but Impact, the product changed a little bit, and I found it harder to pay attention to it. I think that some of this might be maybe trying to capture some of that back. And I see a lot of buzz from my friends. I have a couple people who are really Impact diehards right now who maintain that it's the best product around. Now, I know that's all personal preference, just like me loving, ICW and preferring that. But it looked like they're really trying to capture something again. They already have the build set up with Magnus coming back and challenging Shelley for the title. So I can see that, and I think that's a better move, for Nick Aldis also, versus what he had been doing with NWA. One of the things, and I hope this doesn't seem like a foul to some people, but when I watched that match and that footage, because I didn't watch the whole show, it just really said something to me of how small that crowd and that setup was.
Where they're at these days, yeah.
Yeah, and I had that same kind of thought. Maybe smaller than some ROH shows that I had been to in person back in the day. Now I did prefer studio wrestling. That's the Memphis stuff was all in a studio, but this felt different. It felt so small, and that that made me a little sad, to tell you the truth, because I remember even in the Spike TV days, they had it was a shrinking crowd, but it was a pretty rabid crowd. Can't even really hear the crowd in some of this. So I know it was an emotional moment for Shelley, but to not have that huge crowd reaction that you want to see in an emotional title change, it affected it a little bit, at least for me as a home viewer.
Yeah, I think it's kind of one of the quandaries that they're in, and it might explain somewhat why they go with an Alex Shelley, because on one hand, you want to distance yourself from with this conversation we've been having for years now, distance yourself from the stench of the worst of the Dixie Carter TNA years. On the other hand, you want to associate yourself with the fact that at some point, and for many years, they were pretty big league, right? I mean, the TV production package, the arenas, the audiences, it looked like a very much more of a major league a product from a production standpoint, from an audience standpoint, than it does now. It feels like an indie, right? It feels like kind of a televised indie. So a guy like Alex Shelley, who's got some name recognition, has respect, never got the world title, and has this connection to the legacy TNA in a positive way, kind of like with the AJ Styles of the world, or Samoa Joe. There's just not that many of those guys around anymore. Saban's another one. Shelley's got some size over Saban, so that makes some sense. But it also, I'd be lying if there's not part of me that thinks that, like, really, this is where we're at now, putting the world title on Alex Shelley. I don't know. You had any thoughts on it, Brian?
Well, I mean, it's sort of like we've talked about a lot of times here. This is a company it's a survivor. It's been in a constant state of flux. It's always like kind of changing form, changing shape. The Impact Wrestling of today is such a completely different animal from what it was at various different times in its history. I agree with what you're saying about the presentation is so different now that it doesn't feel as big time as it used to feel. But I mean, I kind of feel, and while I'm not the hugest Impact fan in the world, that, and I've said this before on here, they've sort of found their place in the wrestling ecosystem, at least right now. I don't think, look, here's the thing. They were at one point the number 2 promotion in the industry, but they were never, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, I don't know, they were never at the level that, like, say, an AEW is as the number 2. It always felt like they were the number 2 by default because there was nobody else, whereas what's happening right now is much more of a head-to-head, even though WWE is clearly in the lead, it's more of a head-to-head competition. So, I mean, putting the belt on someone like Alex Shelley, who's a great worker, who's been there a long time, who has a lot of support, I don't see anything wrong with that. I mean, they're not, maybe it doesn't set the world on fire, but I don't think that that's their goal right now.
It felt one thing, and this is, a little nitpicky, but that promo he gave on the Impact after winning the title, and I don't think he said it. The fans said it, but I don't know if they were echoing something he said. The whole "you deserve it" thing, and that's what feels a little bit like a gold watch. Like, well, you've been here so long, might as well, give you the world title. And I don't know. I mean, look, he beat Macklin. They put him over cleanly on Macklin, so no controversy, anything like that. clearly the end game is still Nick Aldis, I would think, which makes a lot of sense because Aldis has a ton of credibility. And now Aldis is going to challenge Shelley for the title at Slammiversary. All right. I mean, I'm sure it'll be really good. You know, after the face-off with Macklin and Aldis at what was that? Rebellion. I thought that's the match they'd be building to. So maybe Aldis doesn't get it here, and they extend it some to Bound for Glory. I mean, that's supposed to be the big show. So if you're building to a big Aldis title win, you'd think they'd do it at Bound for Glory.
And also, Aldis has gone now like totally heel, whereas it wasn't quite sure what you know. He was sort of on the fence. And so I think that might have also played a part in this kind of decision making because, they obviously liked what they saw with what he did in the NWA and kind of reinventing himself as this sort of like not over the top, but like old school, subtle, like Nick Bockwinkel style heel world champion. Like that's what they want to replicate. And so they're kind of setting the table for that, essentially.
Yeah.
I think Nick has always had it. He's always had it. But I don't think that there's been necessarily kind of like a big break for him. I know that it was that at least where the NWA started, it was a pretty big deal. But I think it would be really intriguing to see him on a bigger stage, like in an AEW or WWE, worked up to the top of the card. I'd like to see that someday. I'm not sure if it's going to happen now. He's kind of embarked on this, the title chase again in TNA. It's not, or Impact. Sorry, it's not going to happen anytime soon. But I'd like to see him give it all he's got to a big audience.
Yeah, he's still a relatively young guy, even though he's been at this at so long. I don't think WWE. I mean, I think they'd give him a look in as much as he's got some size and some speaking ability, but I'd be surprised if he's even much on their radar in terms of his accomplishments. AEW, I could see them giving him a look. I mean, we'll talk about this in a moment, but AEW will bring in anyone. I mean, they've got to have like the most bloated payroll in the world. They're just adding and adding and adding. I just saw what's his name, John Morrison is now part of the team. So
Johnny Elite, thank you very much.
Is it Johnny TV? I think they're calling.
I thought Johnny TV. Right? Yeah,
they called him Johnny Elite when he did a couple of quick shots for them. They brought him in as Johnny Elite, but yeah.
Another hell of a hand, but just to say that, like, man, they I shouldn't say they don't turn anyone away, but they love to add payroll. So I could certainly see him over there, and I could see him getting some TV time as much anybody gets TV time. But this is a good step for him, I think. I think Impact will be more. They'll make more use out of what he built in the NWA, where he was great. And Brian, we've talked about this a lot, but the reality is that was a relatively small audience. It gave him a platform to kind of create this character, and now you should take it somewhere else. Let's talk about the number two, Brian. AEW. They've had a very busy few weeks, and more to come with Forbidden Door this weekend. That might have already happened by the time people are watching this, and right after that, you've got Wembley Stadium, then you got All Out. It's interesting because on one hand, there are all these indications of, again, it being a busy, exciting time for AEW. On the other hand, there's all kinds of metrics that show that this is not a hot product right now, and not just metrics, but I feel like there is a growing negativity among some, about TNA. Some of it is even the video game. I mean, it's just
AEW.
Right. What did I say? I'm sorry.
TNA. Yeah, Mike's rubbing off on you. Sorry.
It might be a Freudian slip. The AEW video game and the product. It just, I think Tony Khan is being second guessed more than ever before. Anyway, in the middle of that, we get the return of CM Punk, one of the biggest stars in all of wrestling, came back last week in Chicago. and I've criticized him as much as anybody for just being kind of a miserable guy to be around to work with. But it is undeniable that this guy has got a star power that nobody in AEW has. It was immediately apparent. But the irony of it is that I think what makes the guy such a star is this confidence and this bravado and this kind of like anti-authority personality that in some ways only makes AEW look worse because he's out there kind of crapping on AEW. I mean, even now, I mean, after being gone for 9 months, he's out there taking shots at the Young Bucks, fans of the Young Bucks, and getting big pops for it. So I don't know. It's all kind of a mess right now. What's been your observation, Mike?
I'm not sure where to start with that. I've been a big CM Punk fan for a long time. I also want to preface this by saying I'm acutely aware that CM Punk doesn't care about my opinion or anybody else's opinion for that matter. But I'm going to share it nevertheless. It felt like, that old mentality, that booking mentality where you don't want your fans exhausted from cheering by the main event. This comeback, like how many times can you come back and how exhausted am I for kind of cheering this situation? That's what I'll call it. And I remember early on being in kind of disbelief about the media scrum, texting back and forth with somebody at the magazine, like, hey, wouldn't it be the biggest work in history if this was all, if this was all staged and it wasn't real, and getting this back, kind of bursting my bubble. No, it's real. And these are real problems. And I found that disappointing. I know that happens in workplaces sometimes. And I think, people sometimes want a band to get back together, and there are guys that truly hated each other by their time together. Probably think about some of the terrible jobs that you've had, and you had maybe some good times with people and did a few things. But if somebody came back to you 20 years later and said, you want to get back with these people again, you'd be like, no, I can't stand them. Right. I still can't stand them. This is starting to kind of color my perception of what's going on. And so many backstage reports about people not being able to work together, refusing to work together. It just didn't have the pop that it did last year for me, from the promo to even the match. I hope that it gets better. I hope that there are some swerves and some unexpected things ahead, but I'm not sure if there are, because the egos that are involved are so bruised and they seem to be pretty fragile.
Yeah. Brian, what kind of grade do you give Punk's return, both in presentation and also impact, and how he looks? Some criticism about maybe cosmetically not in the best shape, given that he'd been away for some time.
CM Punk has never been a body guy, though. He's never been one of these jacked up guys. I mean, yeah, you could notice his body was noticeably different, but it's not like, he wasn't like Ryback or something where like if he came back looking like that, you'd be like, what has this guy been up to? I mean, I don't think it was that big of a deal at all. What I've said before, the kind of thing that he's doing now and that he did with the promo, it's unfortunate that it has come now out of a place of reality and there's all these things that happen under the bridge. But I feel like he should have been doing this from the word go, from the minute he came in. That should have been his persona, his angle. I'm too big for this company. Tony Khan begged me for a year to work here, and I finally gave up because he was annoying me. You got a bunch of whatever. Like I think that should have been his role all along. So, I mean, in the long term of it, I like what he's doing. It's just too bad that it's so real. That's the problem, because there's weird dynamics going on. There's no doubt that he's good for business, in my mind, at least. I mean, I think I'm one of those people that says you got to set your differences aside, even if it's just for a finite amount of time, and work with the guy. I just think it would be dumb not to. Yes, he's a jerk. Yes, he's arrogant. He's also a really big star, and he's good for business. And a lot of really big stars are arrogant jerks. I could name them. I don't want to, bury people, especially that are no longer with us. I can give you a laundry list of legends that were arrogant jerks and are beloved and are considered legends to this day. But it's weird because what you see happening is he's what, can you hear me?
Yeah, no, I was pointing at my Ultimate Warrior.
I thought you were pointing to your ear like I can't hear you.
I think you fit the bill.
What you see happening though is now everybody was saying, oh my God, this audience, they don't realize what's going to happen when Punk goes out there. They're going to kill him. They're going to hate him. They're going to boo him out of the building. But what's happening is he seems to be turning the audience against the elite. Now, I know that Omega and the Bucks have their fans. They're always going to have their fans. But they are now coming off as a bunch of wimpy crybabies in this whole equation. And the fans are starting to turn and, you know, it's this like, I don't know. Do they want that? Do they care? I know that Omega and the Bucks do not seem to be happy. I don't know how much of this is a work, but, you know, they no-show Dynamite. They did a pre-tape so they could still be a part of the show, but they said they weren't going to be there. It seems to be like a civil war. It's almost like what's happening with Dynamite and Collision is almost like what WWE for years has tried to create with Raw and SmackDown, except it's real. Right. And I don't know if they can control it. There's so much chaos right now.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And I was going to make the same point. And I know the thinking of, and remember, they even at one point reconsidered where they would hold Collision, the first episode of Collision, whether or not Punk was going to be there. And the thinking was, well, if Punk's there, we got to do it in Chicago. And I get why. And you saw why. The flip side of that is that he was so over that I think fans who even were kind of down on Punk and maybe were siding with the Elite and the Bucks in this whole civil war watched him, and you kind of got sympathetic to CM Punk. Like, yeah, maybe he's right. Maybe he's been right all along. And whether he is or he's not, it is the case that he made the Elite, and you know, they're not just a few other wrestlers. They are the heart of AEW, right? I mean, they are founders, they are executive vice presidents, and they really embody the spirit of AEW. And you know, you use the word wimps. I think there are words that are even harsher than that for what there was the one line he talked about. The only thing softer than fans or the wrestlers who you root for. And it was a home run of a line, and the kind of thing that really deflates, I think, a lot of AEW fans. So yes, on one hand, Punk feels hot, he feels relevant, but he's doing it, you know, at the expense of AEW, and it's such a fascinating kind of dynamic. And you know, it's interesting when Punk was away for all those years, and then AEW started up. The thought, I think, the popular opinion by so many was, this guy would be a perfect fit here, right? I mean, here's this company that's like anti-WWE, anti-authority. It's like wrestlers first, that kind of thing. And he goes over there, and in some ways, he's the worst fit, you know, in part because he's so curmudgeon-y. And I don't even necessarily mean this in a negative way. I'm the same way in a lot of ways. But I just think he's got zero tolerance for sort of like childishness and immaturity. And he sees that he's surrounded by it.
I think he's also way more of a WWE guy than anybody thought, because
and including him. Yeah.
He came in there and clearly he was comparing it and going like, what am I doing here? Like, this is amateur hour. Like, it was almost,
you know, what was the promo he just gave? He talked about selling out Madison Square Garden.
Right.
You know, he's not doing that in AEW.
I think he had the same feelings that Cody had when I think Cody said, like, what am I doing here? I got to go back where I belong.
Yeah.
I'm not saying Punk is going to go back to WWE, but he had that prima donna attitude that comes from being a top WWE guy, I think.
I do think that his time in AEW makes it more likely that he will return to WWE, right? You know, because I do think he gets to do that comparison and realize, one of these is very major league and the other one is not. Yeah, Mike, you agree with that?
Yeah, Alec, you made some really good points that and I'm again coming back to things to how things personally resonate with me. You know, one of the reasons that I really liked CM Punk as a performer is because as an individual, as a person, he brought these elements of his personality. He always talked about the old Steve Austin advice of like amplifying your real personality. I believe I heard him talk about that a few times. And this character he plays is for a large part who he is. But, most of my friends are very progressive. Most of my friends are into, comics and pop culture and music. And most of my friends are anti-authoritarian or are anti-authority. But they're not, to use some of your words and Brian's words, they're not childish. They're not impetuous. They don't kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater. And that's what's really kind of wearing a little bit for me. Now, I do want to touch on you guys talking about his physique and about the idea that he's never been a body guy. One of my favorite wrestlers of all time, no lie, is Phil Hickerson. And if you don't know who Phil Hickerson is, you can Google him. Definitely not a body guy. So I've always enjoyed the kind of the real person, the real physiques competing in the ring. So he doesn't get any points off for that. But this has got to get better sooner or later, because I agree that he could probably very well end up back in WWE after clearing some of the rust off. But he has lost some fans over the years. He has lost some momentum because of it's not just a work. We know deep down that when MJF cuts some of his promos and when he does, crazy things at cons and stuff like that, that's probably not really the way he is. But Punk, I think what you see is what you get. And that's going to be a problem.
Real life MJF. Yeah, you're absolutely right. all the stuff that, MJF with all the little nods to Vince McMahon and WWE, for show as part of the gimmick. That's really CM Punk. CM Punk's really kind of doing that over and over again. And it's sort of like, on one hand, his star shines brighter, but again, it's kind of at the expense of AEW. I mean, the more big league he looks, the more little league he's making AEW look. And it's a real problem.
And I also feel like,
MJF off. I'm sorry, I just want to make this point. I think AEW pulled MJF back a little bit when he was cutting some pretty harsh promos that really took some of the luster off of the company. I don't think you can rein in Punk the way that MJF can be reined in behind the scenes.
I also think that now I'm getting the sense that, I don't know if this company, from a booking standpoint, is capable of really capitalizing as much as they should be doing on having him come back like this. Because, again, it's like, I hate to compare the two companies, but WWE, glaring exceptions notwithstanding, is very good at really capitalizing on situations. And if you look at what already the presentation with Punk is bizarre to me. First of all, there's been no interaction with the Elite other than him running them down, which makes them look terrible. So if you can't have gotten these guys on the same page, then don't even tap the hornet's nest, because ideally what you should have had is some kind of a response. And I know people were hoping, I don't want a fantasy book, but for example, you could have had them come out and do a run-in on his match at the end of the show, as a response to what he said. That's what you do if you're booking wrestling, not if you're just, having wrestlers hate each other and airing their dirty laundry. And now you've got a situation where, like, I understand it's the Forbidden Door pay-per-view and the whole angle of it is New Japan and AEW, but now you've got his first pay-per-view match back and he's buried in a tournament. It just feels like they're wasting the potential of this already.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say AEW is something of a mess right now, and there's a lot to like. I mean, just a wealth of talent and embarrassment of riches when it comes to talent. But such a lack of focus and discipline. I was watching that episode of Dynamite Wednesday night, and there was in the middle of the show like a little a 2-minute segment where they went over like all the matches and segments coming up over the next 3 shows. So they were promoting Rampage, Collision, and Forbidden Door, and I counted, I think, like 20 different things that they were promoting. Just rapid fire, segment after segment, and in there, like,
it was nuts.
Just thrown in there, and Okada versus Bryan Danielson. You're like, Okada versus Bryan Danielson, this is gigantic, and we'll hear from this one, and this one, and then on Collision will be this, and it's just right. It is such a lack of focus and just so much going on. I mean, I mentioned it somewhere along the way. I guess it's something of a spoiler by the time people are hearing this. John Morrison shows up, and it's just throw more and more and more and more onto it, and it feels like an undisciplined mess, the kind of the worst of the indies, and a lot of it is not very good. I mean, at its best, it's fantastic. I mean, some of the best wrestlers in the world are in AEW, but they're, again, that indie sort of mentality of, let everybody go do their thing, and it just doesn't feel like there is somebody keeping folks in line. The CM Punk conditioning thing, a minor point, but I'll say there are other guys in that company getting some pretty big pushes who, I'm sorry, but they do not look major league in terms of their physical
I've talked
appearance.
about Adam Cole on here. I know
Adam
people kill me
Cole.
for it.
I mean, last time I saw him, it blew
I feel
my
like
mind.
I could beat up Adam Cole. I'm not,
Yeah, it's and look,
don't try.
I won't try. But
I mean, I know he had
I think I have more muscle definition than he does.
You're probably not wrong. I mean, like, and I know it, and people talk about body shaming and all this stuff, and I know he had health issues and all that, but your it is a cosmetic business. He's getting an angle with the world heavyweight champion, and I'm sorry, he does not look major league right now. And does it make him less of a fantastic performer or a wrestler or a showman? No, but
you also got to point out the fans do love him there. I mean, he does get this. It boggles my mind to a certain degree, but I mean, he gets this godlike response. It's like, Jesus Christ is walking out to the ring when he's out there. They're hanging on his every word,
and he's great. He is.
Yeah, he's good.
He doesn't look the part.
No, he doesn't. And but there's a certain segment of the fan base that does not care. AEW fans, a lot of them, they really don't care about things like that. I got killed on Twitter last week when I was, you're talking about the throwing everything at the wall, the finish of Dynamite, not this week's one, but last week's, where they had 14 different run-ins, and Takeshita shows up, and Eddie Kingston shows up, the Elite are there, everybody's turning on everybody. There were people that loved it and thought it was the greatest thing ever. And I even said that. I said, there's two kinds of wrestling fans. The ones that just saw what I did and thought, this is the greatest ending I've ever seen. And the ones who were like, this is a complete and total mess, and I don't even know who's feuding with who. Right. And it was like a barometer, because I had people coming at me from both sides, but it's true.
And I think one easy way to explain this is that AEW is the kind of wrestling that Dave Meltzer likes, and I have nothing but respect for Dave Meltzer. I think he's brilliant. He has forgotten more about wrestling than I will ever know. He's obviously and he criticizes AEW as well, but it is niche, right? And maybe to a flaw. I don't know. I mean, look, they've got their audience. They're doing well. Collision did, I think, 800,000 or something like that. Some people are looking at it as a really good number. Some people are looking at it as a really bad number. It's the kind of number that could be interpreted different ways. It is south of $1 million, but I don't know how realistic it is to get north of $1 million on a Saturday night on a product that's not super hot. But whatever the case, it was the return of CM Punk. You're not going to have that moment again. And so it would suggest that's sort of the ceiling. So we'll see where it goes from here. The fascinating thing is, again, at the same time, they're about to pack Wembley Stadium. They're about to do Okada versus Bryan Danielson, which is, again, for a certain kind of fan, the dream match of all dream matches. I'm super excited about seeing that. So there's all these kind of mixed signals about, is this a hot company? Is this a really cold company? I don't know. Let's talk about that other company, WWE. I think it's a lot safer to say that they are still pretty hot, maybe cooled off a little bit from WrestleMania. But every time I think that the Bloodline angle is starting to kind of like approach its expiration date, they do something to freshen it up and heat it up. And that angle, I feel like every week we're talking about this, Brian. It was one of those pull the kids into the room, pull the wife into the room with Jay making his decision at the end of SmackDown. Just so good. And you think about, like, the Road Warrior pop or whatever, like those kind of like generational pops that you're lucky to see once every 10 years. WWE's had like a half dozen of them just in the last 6 months off of this angle, and they keep on coming. And I think the writing is fantastic, but I'll go back to this again. It's the performances. Everybody's so great. I mean, this really is a masterclass on promos and knowing your character and authenticity. And I'll say it again, Jay is the MVP. I mean, Jay is just so awesome. His timing, all of that was so perfectly executed. The whole you're out and I'm out too. Super kick lands perfectly. Roman goes down like a champ. I mean, it couldn't have been better.
This when he went down the second time, that was perfect. Yeah. I also got to say too, Heyman is just. I mean,
Oscar is right. Everybody would be nominated for lead actor, supporting actor, all of it.
It's true. If they ever gave Emmys for wrestling, Heyman would have to get one. I'm talking about like when he's standing there and the pride on his face when Roman Reigns is putting him over to the Usos was just absolutely priceless. I thought he was going to start crying, it was phenomenal. And yeah, I'll be the person to say what I've been saying for a couple of months now. What they're doing would be even better if Roman Reigns wasn't the champion anymore.
There's no need. I mean, right? Like that's the one thing with all this is it's just now he's got 3 belts for some reason, and he's not defending any of them.
It would contribute to his whole world crumbling, because it is crumbling, but yet he's still the heavyweight champion. So it's sort of like this weird thing where he's got this belt that he doesn't really defend so much, and it's not really serving the same purpose that it was serving before, at least in my opinion. But I mean, overall, it's great stuff still.
Mike, we know now Money in the Bank, the Civil War, Usos versus Roman and Solo, which is a gigantic match, but not a world title defense. We've got SummerSlam around the corner. There still is this feeling, and I think it's a testament to the quality of storytelling that they're doing, that you keep wondering, like, what are they building toward? What is the climax here? And it's not 100% clear. I mean, I guess there's a lot of ways to go, right? You could do a Jimmy Uso match. You could do a Jey Uso match. But what do you see as kind of the progression of this over the next few months?
I'm not entirely sure. I like where it's going. Now, before I get too far into this, I need your guys' help for a minute. This picture behind me has been driving me crazy. You see how this gives you a window into my personality. I cannot take it any longer. So is that better? Does that work better?
It was never a problem.
I had not even noticed it before.
And that is what it's like to be married to me. So now you know.
In fact, your head is covering most of it.
Yeah.
You can't even see
it.
Well,
I was trying to for a while. I'm like, I can't stand looking at it.
Now I'm going to be like super aware.
Boy, one of my Facebook friends, a fellow wrestling fan, put over. I hate using industry lingo, but I'm going to use it anyway because I'm among friends. Put this over as he said the best wrestling storytelling ever. Now I'm not sure about that, but it has been pretty incredible. You guys were joking about it.
You have to think about it, because I think that's something that we've all thought about. At the very least, you've thought, when's the last one that's been this good? And people talk about Triple H and Batista. This is better than that, I think. Yeah. So now you're going back 20 years.
Austin and McMahon would be a candidate for me.
Yeah. You think about the old days, though. I've already talked about Memphis a lot, but, used to be like a feud would begin just over a promo. Somebody's out at the desk, says something the other guy doesn't like, or you think you want my belt or something like that. And then you're off, and like months later, you don't remember what the feud's about. I remember one of my favorite WrestleMania matches, underrated WrestleMania matches, was Billy Jack Haynes versus Hercules. I can't remember. I know it's a weird one.
I remember it. I
remember being intrigued by
the Battle of the Full Nelsons.
Yeah. I remember, and the match was not that great of a climax, to tell you the truth, but I remember the build to it. This is so many light years away. The storytelling, the writing, and even in that, what was it? I think what's on YouTube is basically just kind of a less than 5 minute boiled down segment but everything that unfolds in that 5 minutes is, I hate to sound over the top, but it's pretty magnificent in terms of storytelling. Whether you're comparing that to movies, primetime TV, Heyman is incredible. I love seeing him there with 2 belts while Roman has the belt over his shoulder. And I think, Brian, to your point earlier, that has become part of again, another term I don't like to use because I'm not an insider, but it's become part of the heat. That he's not really defending those titles like people would have expected from a fighting champion. And that keeps it that I see what they're doing. I don't want to say they're dragging it out. They're extending that. They're making this part of the storyline. I really want to see how it goes. I was not a big Usos fan for many, many years. It just didn't excite me when they came out. Now it does. Now I'm paying attention every time. So I'm not sure if a solo match is going to be the end of this.
But a solo match? You mean a singles match, or do you mean a match with Solo?
A singles match. Sorry.
Okay.
I'm not sure that a singles match is going to be the end of this. I hope it doesn't get dragged out to the point where it ruins the storyline. That would be really hard to do, but it's still possible. But if we get another month or more out of this, I'm fine with it. It's captivating.
Yeah, I wonder if they kind of restock the Bloodline. Do we get kind of a Bloodline 2.0 with, I don't know,
Jacob Fatu?
Yeah, that's the one that I was thinking of. And
Lance Anoa'i? I mean,
yeah,
they could do it.
Yeah, I mean, can you call up the Rock's daughter from NXT? We still at one point the be all end all was Rock Roman Reigns, and now it feels like that's so kind of like forgotten, and we almost. It's not better than this, but it could, when you talk about a climax, that would be the climax of all climaxes if they can get to that organically, or maybe we're seeing the end of this. Maybe this Civil War, Usos versus Roman and Solo, is kind of the end of this.
Mm-hmm. And even if it does drag on, I mean, because that happens in wrestling, they don't know when to stop something. They beat it to death. People, in future years, people remember the best stuff. Like people that weren't around during the Attitude Era. I mean, Austin McMahon went on forever. They turned Austin. They did all these dumb things where they continued doing it beyond probably when they should have been doing it. People don't talk about that part of it. Mike, I know you'll appreciate this, but everybody loves, and I love, Jerry Lawler and Andy Kaufman. It was beautiful. It was one of the greatest things that's ever been done in wrestling. But it also had these later stages that people don't talk about.
Sure.
Andy kept coming back, and it was like diminished returns. And
the NWO,
stop. Right. The NWO is a great example of that, where you're like, it was good for a year and a half, but it went on for like twice that long amount of time, where you're going like, all right, when are these guys going to lose? When is this going to stop? When is somebody going to, that happens. It's not good in the short term, but I think when we look back on it, it'll just be talked about all the great stuff that they did with the Bloodline, honestly.
Yeah.
People love reunions too. How many times did Evolution get back together? Did DX get back together? Team, Rated RKO.
50th anniversary. We'll see a bunch of gray-haired old Samoans out there, throwing the number one out.
Yeah, I have no doubt about it.
The Bloodline 2.0 idea is really intriguing to me because it could go a couple different ways. I mean, you could have a 2.0 team that's a disaster and it requires the old team to get back together, or it goes in a different direction, or it could just be a new team that kind of goes on. There's potentially some life left on this. I just hope they don't ruin it, but it seems like right now they know that they have lightning in a jar, and they're doing what they can to keep it that way.
That is sort of like, the catch-22 of having something so good is that, you're always kind of like on the edge of like, oh, don't mess it up. I never think going into WrestleMania where everybody assumed, at least I did, that Roman was losing the title to Cody. you were both excited about it, but it was also sort of bittersweet that, like, oh, Roman's reign is going to be over, and ultimately it wasn't. But at some point, yeah, this is going to come to an end. Let's talk about that other world title. We're a few weeks into it now. Seth is the world heavyweight champion. Already probably has defended that title more than Roman has in the last year, which I guess was the point. It's supposed to be sort of like the working man's title. Brian, any early reviews for how Seth is doing? And this program with Finn Balor, which it sounds like Vince McMahon kind of called an audible last week to put some heat on it, and did that segment with a big beatdown, which I think turned out pretty well, and probably created more interest for a feud that was maybe a little lukewarm going into the pay-per-view.
The fans love Seth. I mean, I think if they were going to do this world title, which, as you know, I don't think they should have even done, but if they were going to do it, he's a great person to have it on. As far as he goes, though, and again, I don't know if this is just my own tastes or my age or whatever, his character, his matches, his performances are always great. His character continues to baffle me because I still don't understand how he is a baby face. It's a very strange presentation. I think he'd be great either way. I'm not questioning putting the belt on him. It's just every time he's out there, every promo he gives just comes off to me as this is stuff that a heel would say and do. And so it's strange booking. That's my one issue with it. But I think, he's great at what he does. And there's going to have to eventually be a reckoning about this singing of his theme song.
It's a big problem. It's the new
what, right? Yeah. Because and he loves it. He just gave an interview where he was like, why would I ever want them to stop doing this? And the point is, the thing is, it's great for him, but it's not great for anything else about the product and the show. And I think you're going to see it more with other people's songs. And I don't, I think if you look at Adam Cole, I think like 75% of why people love him is just because they want to go like Adam Cole, baby. Like that's the extent of the appeal of many baby faces in wrestling now, is that people just want to sing a song, which is so strange to me, but that's where we're at right now.
Yeah. Real quick, let me ask Mike about Money in the Bank. We've got the contestants now. Latest is Logan Paul. I think he's probably a favorite to win it. And one thing that I do like about the World Heavyweight title is that your sense is that it can change, right? So Seth is the champion now, but I could absolutely see Logan winning, cashing in, and beating Seth Rollins for the World Heavyweight title, or a number of different. I could see Finn Balor theoretically even winning the World Heavyweight title. But what do you think about Money in the Bank and any favorites?
I think I have this awareness that I'm talking about Logan Paul way more than I want to. My son is a big Logan Paul fan. I really don't know why it happened. I know that I have to buy Prime every time we leave the house.
I would just throw out some people upstairs, with my kids.
And I just, I hate to be one of those fans, but I was really resentful when it became obvious that he was going to be working some big shows in WWE when all this started. But he's delivered every time. I feel so. It's like that time. What was it? I think Snooki did some incredible move at one of the WrestleManias.
The move on handspring elbow. Yeah,
I gotta cheer for this now. What are you doing to me? But Logan Paul is so over the top. When I saw the Money in the Bank thing, I'm like, that makes sense. There's a path there. I do think that we're at a point, and many people have said this about ladder matches or about wrestling in general, that we have to keep going over the top to get that crowd reaction. And Logan Paul adds that over the top element in there. So I hope it works. I hope it's not reckless. I hope it's not just this kind of gratuitous, celebrity exposure. But I'm going to watch it. I'm going to watch it, and I'm going to be excited about it. And there's not much that I can do about that unless somebody messes it up for me.
I think he'll be great in it. I think he's a good choice to win it. I wouldn't have a problem with him cashing in and winning the world title. I think, and this is off of Bad Bunny having that great match in Puerto Rico, but I think Logan Paul is the greatest celebrity wrestler ever. I just they're just doing a junket for the new season of Heels, and I got to interview what's his name, Stephen Amell, and we talked a little bit about this and kind of like the new era of celebrity wrestlers. And he talked about how he thinks, he'd like to take some credit for kind of like ushering in this era where they're not holding their nose through it. This isn't Jay Leno or whoever. If you're going to do it, you got to go all in and take it seriously. And I don't think anybody has risen to the occasion as well as Logan Paul is.
Well, thank goodness too, because I remember that era of a celebrity just kind of walking in the ring and they give one kind of open-handed slap and the wrestler goes down and they've got some magical power because they're celebrities. But you're right. The people who have come in recently, a handful of them have really delivered, and they perform like wrestlers.
Yeah. Last thing before we take off out of here, I want to spend a little time talking about the death of the Iron Sheik. When we last talked to Brian, we were talking about the death of Billy Graham and how he was among the last of that era. Sheik sort of straddles those two eras. He was kind of that bridge. But it's always interesting, like, what wrestlers really resonate in the mainstream when they die and which ones don't. And sometimes it's for all the wrong reasons. I think in the Sheik's case, it has a lot to do with kind of and this isn't to disparage him, but the worst of the Sheik, the drug addicted kind of parody of himself that would show up on Howard Stern and just mother F everybody and kind of making a fool of himself, but in front of a really big audience, and less to do with, at one point, a super talented wrestler, performer, showman. What's his legacy? What's his place in wrestling history?
He has a few different legacies. I mean, obviously, there's the one that you mentioned where, for better or worse, I even mentioned it when I, in writing about him, he made himself, or at least the people around him did, he kept himself relevant. He meant something new to a whole new generation. I don't think that was all bad, honestly, all the Twitter stuff. I mean, it kept him out there. And look, this is wrestling. And wrestling is about being outrageous. So he was good at that. But I mean, he also was a part of, because I wrote the book about the original Sheik, obviously, and there's always these comparisons. And, in the modern fandom, the Iron Sheik completely eclipsed the original Sheik. But he did so not because he was a bigger star, because in his day, the original Sheik was a much bigger star in his day. He was a much bigger draw. He was a main event star everywhere he went. But the thing that the Iron Sheik had over him was the Iron Sheik became a part of this pantheon. The Iron Sheik really benefited from the national expansion of the WWF, from that era, that golden age era that people talk about, the Hulkamania era. He was a prominent part of that cast of characters. He was on lunchboxes. He was on ice cream bars. He was an action figure. He was on Saturday morning TV. He was one of the most memorable figures. I mean, if you're talking about the top heels of that like Hulkamania era, he's got to be on your top 5 with people like Roddy Piper and Ted DiBiase. Like, he's on that list. He's one of the names that gets dropped in rap songs when they'll mention wrestlers. I mean, there's this cultural cachet that he had that transcended the business to a degree. And also the other part of the legacy, like you said, is that he was the bridge between these two worlds. He came up in the 70s. He was one of those Vern Gagne trainees. He was, he did his time in all the territories. He was big in Georgia. He did his time in the AWA. He was in the WWF even. He had his first run there in the late 70s, early 80s. But then he became like the bridge, literally, winning the title from Backlund, the transitional champ, losing it to Hogan. I'm not one of those people who go over the top and say, well, if it wasn't for the Iron Sheik, there'd be no Hulkamania and blah, blah, blah. I think that's a little bit of nonsense. I think there were many, many competent heels who could have been that transitional champion. However, he was the one who was, so he deserves recognition for that. I mean, he was the bridge from, in a certain sense, the territorial era of the WWF and the national expansion era of the WWF. So, an important, and I would go so far as to say a beloved figure for sure.
And one of the things that he brought to the table that I do think made his loss to Hogan so special was that character, right? Because so much of what they were trying to get over with Hulk Hogan was the USA American, and this is like 1984. This is like Rocky IV and the height of like Born in the USA. All
the
that
hostage
stuff.
crisis had just happened.
Right.
I mean,
so and he was an authentic Iranian, out there, looked the part, and really embraced it. And so I do think, could that have been somebody else in that role, losing to Hogan? Sure. But I do think it meant more that you had that contrast of Hogan as the flag waving babyface and Sheik as the despicable Iranian. It was one of the matches, maybe singularly, that piqued my interest in wrestling as a young kid, whenever I was 6, 7 years old. I remember watching that over and over and over again. And it was the intro to the whatever WWF's TV, weekly TV was that All American, or WWF Championship Wrestling. And it was Hogan pitting the Sheik in Madison Square Garden with Thriller playing.
And all the Coliseum videos too. The Coliseum video intro video, montage ended with that slow motion 1, 2, 3. This was the moment. This was like the moment, the BC and AD moment of wrestling. And Iron Sheik was right there. That's of course extremely valuable.
And any Iron Sheik memories, Mike, that stand out?
When I was a kid, the years that I lived in Lexington, Kentucky, and one of the territories there, Ox Baker was building his monster heel, Radamias, and billing him as the only man to ever beat, I believe it was the only man to ever beat the Iron Sheik in a cage match. And I had never seen the Iron Sheik at that point, but I knew that was a big deal. It sounded like a big deal to me, and I had some maybe peripheral awareness of him. That's my earliest memory of having some kind of idea that he was a big deal. And he was just this monster heel that if he was defeated, then you knew somebody was pretty good or really bad. It's one of these people though who you can look at in any given field. It's the kind of person you can say, well, that person did it all, from international experiences, very unique life experiences, some drama with his personal family and some unfortunate things there. Some personal struggles, and this fame that just kind of followed him around for better or for worse through the final decades of his life. So definitely a character. And you can't say uniquely American because he was originally from Iran, but it is, he does, as the two of you have said, occupy a very unique spot in American pop culture.
Yeah, when they did the biography on him a few weeks ago, A&E, and I remember thinking at the time that, like, really, we're doing Iron Sheik one? I mean, he didn't, to me, rise in wrestling. He did, but in as much as these biographies are meant to cater to the mainstream, I didn't know what his resonance would be with the mainstream. And I'm glad they did that because, I mean, it ended up being just a few weeks before his passing, and I do think it really humanized him and painted a more complete picture of who he was, warts and all, and really a tragic figure in a lot of ways. I had never heard the full story about his daughter's murder, which is just absolutely heartbreaking. And it was a guy who, I've heard, apparently as clean as you can imagine, in terms of a guy who really was kind of clean living, coming from Iran, and fell into the world of drugs, and it really got the better of him, and it was a struggle, I think, until probably his final years. So really sad, but what you got from that biography, especially seeing his wife, they'd been married, I think they said 60 years, something like that, and his surviving kids, the support system that he had around him, and that they were all really pulling for him. And it was a nice image. Unfortunately, so close to his passing, but I think it really humanized him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right, guys. Thank you so much. Mike, before we sign off here, anything you want to promote, social media or anything else?
I'm just happy to be here, guys, and really am so glad that people keep reading PWI. I think that the magazine has really feels to me like it has grown and improved in the last several years, and the way we've expanded coverage of certain things. I'm just grateful to be part of it. So keep reading PWI is what I want to say.
Absolutely. And Brian, I know you got a lot of irons in the fire, as they say. Anything you want to promote here?
Yeah, I actually have 2 book signings happening next month, which I'm excited about. So I should mention those. They're for Blood and Fire, the biography of the Sheik. And so I'm going to be I don't know when this is going to be
different than the Iron Sheik, not the same guy.
Damn it, Al. I would get those interviews where halfway through I would go, this guy thinks I wrote a book about the Iron Sheik. How do I diplomatically? One of them was on live radio, and I just
my gosh,
I had no choice but to sort of embarrass the guy because it was either him or me in that moment, So I had to. It was live radio, but we got through it. No, but this is the original Sheik, the unbelievable real life story, in fact, of wrestling's original Sheik. I'm going to be Saturday, July 1st at there's a Northeast wrestling show happening at the Jewett City Carnival in Jewett City, Connecticut. I know these are, if people are in the area, I'll be at that show Saturday night, July 1st, with a table. Also July 29th at the New England Fan Fest, which is really cool. I've been to it before. It's in Warwick, Rhode Island. There's going to be a lot of wrestling personalities there, and I've got a table there. I'll be signing books Saturday, July 29th. So.
Excellent. Is it, maybe this goes without saying, but did that kind of addendum to the Sheik, now he is largely known as the original Sheik, was that because of the Iron Sheik, that there
100%?
Yeah.
100%. In fact, I got into it in detail in the book. In fact, I went on a detour where I sort of gave some significant background on Khosrow Vaziri because his story intersected with the original Sheik. It absolutely was a reaction. They didn't have a ton to do with each other. I know, like they worked a couple of tag team matches on indies. They never worked against each other. The Iron Sheik had been to the Sheik's home and had been they had moved in some circles. In fact, when I met the Sheik's family, the original Sheik, recently, they had a scrapbook and they actually had some pictures together. I was very surprised to see.
So no resentfulness, hard feelings.
It was from the best I could tell. There was in the beginning, there was this sense of, and I know it's hilarious because one of the Iron Sheiks, he loved to call people jabronis, but the original Sheik, one of his reactions was like, who is this jabroni that's stealing my gimmick? Because you got to remember too, this is not to knock the Iron Sheik, but especially before the national expansion and everything, he was a mid-card wrestler. He was a mid-card heel. He was a foreign heel that you could plug into any program and to get, some heat going and get the baby face hot. But the original Sheik was like the biggest draw in the business at one point for years on end. He was like the heel version of Bruno Sammartino. I mean, he really was. So he's going like, who is this guy that is? But then he also had the pedigree of, original Sheik, Eddie Farhat, you're a Catholic guy from Lansing, Michigan.
Yeah.
This guy is from Iran. He was the bodyguard of the Shah, and he speaks Farsi and all this. So you had that going for him. It started out as resentment, but I think he came to respect and like him as somebody who found this thing and he made it work for him. But unfortunately, it did have the reaction of kind of eclipsing the original Sheik's pop culture presence, especially in the wrestling world, where he really got overshadowed. And I think to a certain degree, unfortunately, because the original Sheik did have some enemies in the business, I think it was intentional. I think there were certain people that didn't like him, Vern Gagne, Vince McMahon. There were certain people that had issues with the original Sheik, and I think they were more than happy to create this new Sheik character that they would call the Iron Sheik. And I think Vern Gagne actually gave him that name originally as a direct shot, as a way of kind of burying the original Sheik. I do think there's something to that, unfortunately.
Would they introduce the Sheik after the Iron Sheik when he would continue wrestling? Would he be introduced as the original Sheik?
He would, and he wanted it that way. I mean, that was something that he did himself in marketing himself as a response to what was happening, because he started noticing, and people around him, that they would mention, like Dave Brzezinski, his manager, would say, it started happening where he would say, I'm the manager of the Sheik. And they would go, oh, the Iron Sheik. You know, that was like happening over and over. So they knew they had to respond. So he was the one that insisted on being billed that way as the original Sheik, just to try to stay as relevant as he could.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fascinating. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining me. Mike, we'll have you back on before long, I hope. And Brian, I'm sure we'll do it again soon. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks.